On episode 317 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Dr. Adam Nally and discuss his book, The Keto Cure, a low-carb, high-fat dietary solution to heal your body and optimize your health. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/317. This episode is brought to you by Fresh Pressed Olive Oil Company. This is the best olive oil on the market, in my opinion. You can get this shipped directly to your home. They go out and find just the freshest olive oil they can on the market and ship it directly to you. And they're offering you an introductory bottle for $1. This thing retails for $39, but they're going to give it to you for $1 just to try out Fresh Press Olive Oil Club. If you'll do this, you'll be helping the podcast and you'll be helping yourself because this is some really good, fresh pressed olive oil. It tastes delicious and they ship it directly to your house. So it's not sitting on a shelf for a long period of time. It's shipped directly to you from where it's being pressed and made. So this is some really good stuff. Go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/olive oil. Support the show, support our sponsor. Thank you very much. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hello, and thank you for being a part of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. I am so glad you're here. A few announcements before we get into the interview with Dr. Adam Nally. Today is that this episode's going live is April 30th. And if you haven't already registered, today is the last day to register for the 28-day burpee challenge that we're launching tomorrow, May 1st. So today is the last day. I've got to cut it off about 5 p.m. Central. So if you're getting this today, it's released, then you need to go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/burpee. And there you'll find the sign-up form. This is delivered via email like most of the challenges that I do. It's 28 days of burpees. You're going to love what this does for your body. Burpees are one of the most functional exercises that you can do. It works endurance, it works strength, it works mobility. Really, really good exercise, very taxing. So this is going to be a tough challenge. And if you're up for a tough challenge, there are 3 levels. And I have 2 different types of burpees. So it's appropriate to just about everybody, but it's still going to be a very, very tough challenge for everybody. If you go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/burpee to learn more about that. But again, today's the last day to sign up for the burpee challenge. So all that said, you would have known that this was the last day to sign up for the burpee challenge if you were part of our Facebook group. I made the decision to go with the burpee challenge a little late in the month. So this only one episode that's going to come live during this period of time after I've made the decision and started building this out. So if you want to join the burpee challenge, obviously 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/burpee. But if you want to make sure that you don't miss the next challenge, I'd encourage you to become a part of our Facebook group. You can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/group. I'm going to make the announcement there each time so you won't fall behind. You won't miss an opportunity to do this kind of stuff. Again, go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/group, and that'll take you to the Facebook group page. You can request to enter there. I let everybody in, and as long as everybody plays good together, we all get along, then I don't have any problems. Obviously, I don't want spam out there, and I don't want problems out there. We've got a really cool group. I really enjoy interacting with folks out there. So if you go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/group, you can be a part of what we're doing out there. You'll learn what's going on before you miss an opportunity again. So please do go out to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/group. Finally, I'm launching a little survey. I've been working to try to make the podcast a little bit better. I'm hoping that the sound quality is coming out a little bit better. This is the second time I'm recording this session because my first attempt at it had some recording problems, and my producer came back and said, you might want to check those files. He was absolutely right. I did have some problems with the files, so I'm trying to learn a new software. Fortunately, it is a free software, but it's giving me some problems. I am recording this again. That said, I'm putting some time into trying to make the podcast better for you. and I'd appreciate if you could do something for me to make the podcast even better. If you go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/survey, it's a very short survey, a form you fill out that will give me information to make the podcast better, because it's going to tell me what matters to you. And that way I can know what kind of guests to try to get on the show to make sure that we're covering the content that's most relevant to you. So go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/survey and complete that survey. As a special thank you, I'm offering a free coaching session. So you're going to get a half-hour coaching session with me over the phone just for filling out the survey. So if you'll take the time to do the survey, you can get a free coaching call. I usually offer these coaching calls for $50 each. So it's a $50 retail value that you're getting with this coaching call. And I'm going to give it to you for free just for helping me out with the podcast. So go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/survey and you can help me make this podcast even better. So our guest today is family practitioner and an obesity medicine specialist, and he's located in Surprise, Arizona. I always find that kind of humorous that there actually is a place called Surprise, but it is. And he's really cool. He's known by the moniker of Doc Muscles, and we actually get into a little bit of the story of how he became Doc Muscles. But he is one of the preeminent experts in ketosis. He uses it with his clients, and he's used it with his clients for quite some time. He's been in ketosis for quite some time, so the guy really understands his stuff. He's a medical doctor, so he's bringing that medical aspect of understanding what it's doing to us physically, and then he's taking it a step further, and he's looking into the various elements that ketosis can be a very, very good effective protocol for. So we get into a few of those. The book is just packed with stuff of what you can do with ketosis as a cure for many of the diseases, the lifestyle diseases that we're suffering with today. So with no further ado, here's Dr. Adam Nally. So Dr. Nally, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, they call you Doc Muscles, and you have a story. I'm going to ask you to tell me that story before we get into this too far. They call you Doc Muscles. I think they should call you the Keto Cowboy, because a lot of your pictures have you with your horse and living out there in Arizona and all that. And it's like, yeah, I think of you more as the Keto Cowboy than Doc Muscles, but you kind of got both of them going on. Could you take just a moment and talk about the story of how you became Doc Muscles?
Well, it's kind of funny. I in medical school, the one way I blew off steam was lifting weights. And so I was in the gym. They had a gym that was part of our medical school that we could go and use anytime we wanted to. And so I found myself in the gym lifting weights a lot because that was just what I enjoyed doing. One day I was in there with a couple of friends, and the trainer, turned to me and said, "Hey, if you keep doing this up, you'll be the doctor of muscles." And so one of my buddies who would rather golf than lift weights said, "Well, just call you Doc Muscles." And so it was a stupid, just a stupid little off the cuff comment. Well, a few days later, we actually had to pick a Twitter name, and that was right as Twitter had become, been released, and we were communicating via social media, this newness that had started, and I couldn't think of a handle, so I just said Doc Muscles, and that's the handle that I've had for Twitter and for Facebook, and I just picked that Twitter handle up, and it's been the kind of the handle that I've used since that point in time. So it really wasn't intentional, other than that's where it came from. I've always enjoyed weightlifting, and always enjoyed the process of gaining muscle and being fit. And my fitness has waxed and waned through the years as you go through schooling and training and various things. But I've always gone back to the fact that weightlifting has been one of the big things I've enjoyed.
Yeah,
and so I've always kept that handle.
For me, weightlifting was, it's cathartic. Plus, now being over 40 and understanding sarcopenia and all of that, I'm like, now it's not just fun; it's actually important. It's critical.
Oh yeah.
And then there's nothing to blow off stress better than just throwing around heavy weights.
Well, I have to say, riding my horse is the other one that I enjoy.
So yeah, absolutely.
Between the two, it's actually quite enjoyable.
Yeah,
and we're finding that those weights play a huge role with insulin resistance, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But it is a big deal.
Yeah, it is, and it helps with testosterone and everything, which again we're going to talk about in a minute. I read this study not too long ago by a Harvard scientist, and they went through their hypothesis and they did their study, and they basically found that the low carb, high fat diet performed better than the standard way that they want you to lose weight of, basically eat the carbs, the complex carbs, and eat all that, and then low fat. And they found that obviously the high fat version worked better. But the Harvard scientist that did the study then in his kind of conclusion just put this kind of off the cuff statement. It's like, but that's too hard to comply with, so you should do it our way. And and he's not wrong to an extent. When you first try to get into ketosis, it can be quite difficult and challenging. Once you're there, it's well worth the effort, but it's that first 3 or 4 or 5 days where, they use the term keto flu. I prefer to call it carb withdrawals as your body learns how to do different fueling systems. But can you talk a little bit about that keto adaptation and then some of the hacks that you have that will help us get through that process a little bit more effectively?
Oh, yeah. No, that's a perfect question. It's interesting. I've been doing a ketogenic lifestyle. I guess I would call it low carb initially in the first few years that we did it. I've been doing it about 13 and a half, almost 14 years. In the first 5 or 6 years, it was more low carb is what we referred to it. And then when we realized it was ketones as the primary fuel that was being used, we started calling it ketosis. What we realized, though, is that to be in ketosis, you have to be very, very low carb. And that means in many cases, it's less than 20 grams a day of carbohydrate. And that's where a lot of the other researchers who I think were probably raised on bread and pasta, say, oh, that's too hard. And nobody can give up bread and pasta. And you find that when you think about eliminating that from your diet, initially there can be some challenge. But when you actually feel as good as you feel when you achieve a ketogenic state, number one, and number two, you start to see a dramatic improvement in all of the inflammatory and other things that occur, you feel fantastic. You don't want to go back. You find that when you do cheat and you pop out of ketosis, you feel so bad that you just go, why did I ever live this way? So it's a very sustainable lifestyle, number one. Number two, to answer the second part of the question, most of us are, if you look at the standard American diet, the average plate on the American eats, and probably other countries as well, 85% of what's on there is starch of some sort. It's some form of starch or carbohydrate or sugar. And so our body gets used to those fuel types. And amazingly, we have these oncogenes and the epigenetics of our body. Because we tend to eat a certain way, our genetics are designed to help assist us eat in those processes. And so we downregulate fat-absorbing receptors in the gut and also in every cell in the body. They're called MCT receptors, and we downregulate those. Well, when we start eating more fat, and we shift to a ketogenic diet where we're decreasing the carbohydrate and we're increasing the fat, our bodies don't usually have as many receptors as it needs to absorb that fuel. So number one, you're not going to absorb the fat as fast, and so it takes a little time to get the fuel in. Number two, it takes weeks and sometimes a couple months to upregulate enough of those receptors, both at the gut and also in the cells, to absorb that fat into the system and have it available as fuel. And then third, there's a conversion process in the liver that takes little time in helping your body adapt to being able to convert the ketones even faster. And that can take a little time too. So there's this transition period of a couple weeks to, in some people, a couple months, where you may feel a little more fatigued. You may not have the energy or sustainability. If you're an athlete, a lot of athletes will say, well, I felt more tired during this first 2 months period of time. I couldn't hit my race pace that I normally hit, or I couldn't lift as hard as I thought I was lifting. And that's just because there's this dampening of fuel as you're shifting over. So that's actually pretty normal. A lot of the keto flu symptoms, though, that people get are not related to the adaptation period. They're actually related to dehydration or an inadequate salt intake. Or I have a number of patients that come in and they just are afraid to eat 70% fat. They're just they have this tremendous fear. And so instead of eating red meat or pork, they cut their carbs out and they keep eating chicken and they limit the fat. And I have a few of them that are still using that. I can't believe it's not butter stuff or whatever that is. And I say, no. We want you to add the fat back in. So sometimes it's just you're not eating enough fat to bring your percentages up to 70 or 80%. Number one. Number two, it may be that you're not taking enough salt, and that would be sodium, potassium, magnesium, and zinc. And then three, that keto adaptation period occurs. And then, as you mentioned, there's often a period of time where there is carb withdrawal. I have some patients that are so carb addicted that they'll actually get migraine headaches that kick in over that first week because of that carb addiction is so powerful. The fructose is converted to an aldehyde form in the liver that acts similarly to morphine and actually stimulates a similar receptor in the brain that morphine does, causing this whoa, I love that kind of a feeling, and you have a withdrawal from that. So those are the pieces that fall into that keto flu or that adaptation period. the symptoms you get of fatigue and feeling groggy and lack of energy, we often refer to as keto flu. The adaptation period, depending on what your body's used to, may take anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months.
Yeah. Now it's funny, the folks that sit there and say you can't live without pasta or bread. They haven't met Maria Emmerich, who is one of the co-authors on here and has a lot of recipes in the book. I actually did her. It was the braised duck with lemon and thyme.
Oh
and,
yeah,
and I did that with chicken. And man, that's worth the price of the book right there. Just that recipe. She's so awesome. And then of course Jimmy Moore was a co-author on the book, and he puts a lot of flavor on this from the perspective of someone who's really, really struggled. He's learned a lot over the years. He does his podcasts. And so he's kind of one of the preeminent experts, along with yourself, in ketosis. One of the things Jimmy really deals with, it's really kind of a huge, huge struggle for him, is insulin resistance. And I think, as we kind of look at what is kind of, and you even say it in the book several times, is one of the core elements of the lifestyle diseases that we get are related to our insulin levels. And our hormones all have to balance out. So again, it comes back to our insulin levels. But if you're insulin resistance, this is a therapy. Using ketosis is a therapy that's going to help you improve your health. Can you talk a little bit about insulin resistance and how ketosis can help us reverse some of those problems?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been in medical practice about 18 years in total, and including residency and training. And the interesting thing I started seeing was these patterns that started arising in the first few years of my practice. I would see people that would come in and they would have a little bit of weight gain, and then their blood pressure would start to creep up a little bit, and their cholesterol would start to rise, and then they'd have gout or they'd have a kidney stone, and some of them would have a little bit of neuropathy that would start to occur, and it wouldn't be all at one time. They would have one of these, or they'd have a couple of these things arise. And then I would notice that their fasting blood sugar was just slightly high. And then a few years down the road, and we'd all of a sudden see that they gained a little bit more weight. Their blood pressure was creeping up, and we were adding a few more blood pressure pills and extra statin drug here. And there was all these patterns. Or I'd have women coming in saying, Dr. Nally, I'm gaining weight, and my periods are irregular, and I'm having trouble with, I can't get pregnant, or various things were occurring. And so there was these patterns that kept occurring over and over and over again. And if you look back in the literature, these things didn't really show up in the early 1900s and late 1800s. They weren't there, but they started to show up in the early 40s and 50s and 60s, and then became predominant through the 70s and 80s. And so as you're looking at these patterns, you see these things repetitively over and over as you go through door number 1 and door number 2 in my office. It got to be quite fascinating. So in trying to understand me, I was struggling with the same thing. Many of the Nallys, if you meet my clan, many of them are 300-400 pounds. So my father was almost 400 pounds when he died. And if you look at his labs and my labs, they're almost identical in the early 30s. And I was really worried that my father progressed to type 2 diabetes. He was eventually on 150 units of insulin and 32 pills and on dialysis, and ended up having a heart attack and a whole slew of things that I talk a little bit about in the book. But I was looking down that same road, and that bothered me. And it bothered me that I was seeing it, and I was doing what I was taught to do in school, yet it wasn't changing. And my patients were doing what I was asking them to do, but it wasn't changing. And we kept adding pills every year. And so that was very bothersome. What I started to notice was that this insulin level, I would check it periodically, it would creep up. And I started noticing that this insulin load was higher and higher. In my residency, one of the things that I was trying to identify is there another marker that we could use to catch diabetes earlier? Because one of the things I saw was triglyceride levels would jump. Well, we know that insulin directly stimulates triglycerides. So if your triglycerides start to rise, what that basically says is your insulin load was high in the last 24 hours. And so I started looking at patterns of insulin. What we found, and what I've found, and what the literature is starting to point to, is that 10 to 15, sometimes 20 years before you ever become a type 2 diabetic, your insulin levels will start to be high. And those high insulin levels will create one of 6 patterns. One is weight gain, one is high cholesterol, one is elevated blood pressure, one is infertility issues in women and polycystic ovarian disease. Another one is testosterone changes. The thyroid is related to this. You'll see thyroid changes with it. And you'll see gout and kidney stones and even gallstones arise in some of these patterns. And these different patterns are the way the body's handling this excessive insulin load. We know that from the perspective of weight gain, there are over 32 hormones that drive weight gain itself, but insulin seems to be the master hormone. And so if your insulin's off, it throws the rest of these hormones out of whack, and your body may use different patterns to try to accommodate that high insulin load. And that's, we think, related to your genetics. But insulin resistance really started to identify itself or raise its ugly head as the problem with many of the what I call the diseases of civilization. So high blood pressure, diabetes, weight gain, gout, kidney stones. These are all diseases that we didn't see a large amount of before the 1900s. And now all of a sudden we do. And it's because what I started noticing is that about 85% of the people that walked through my doors had high insulin levels, 10, 15 years before we ever diagnosed them as diabetics. And so they were overproducing insulin in response to the sugar or the starch they eat. So to make it simple, if you give me a piece of bread, theoretically, I should produce a slice worth of insulin for that piece of bread. But if you check my insulin, when I eat that piece of bread, I'll produce 10 times the insulin in response to that bread. And that insulin acts like a worn or a dull key. It doesn't quite get the cell open very effectively, so the body produces more of it. And so you have now 10 times the insulin floating around your body doing the job that 10 keys is supposed to do the job that one key did. Well, those 10 keys also stimulate other processes in the body that shouldn't have been stimulated by that one piece of bread. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed that metaphor that you had in the book where you talked about a worn key and how much additional effort it has to go on to actually open the lock, because you're turning that key. And if it were the way it was supposed to be, one key goes in and just does it. But our body doesn't react that way if we have this propensity to have more insulin in our system. And that is, insulin is not a bad thing. And you even say that in the book. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing because it's there to protect our brain, keep our blood sugar levels at the level they're supposed to be. But we're just a little out of whack if we're going to get these surges of blood sugar and whatnot. So the sad way of eating, the standard American diet way of eating, is literally going to continue to take you down that sick path. And I appreciate that you mentioned a lot of those diseases that you talked about in the book, is PCOS, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, weight gain, all those different things. I want to talk about a couple of them though that I think are going to really, really hit home, because hypertension was the first time I'd ever really seen anyone tie hypertension to this whole situation and how ketosis could help hypertension. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, it shocked me. I started applying low carb and ketogenic lifestyles to patients when I noticed it helped me with my weight. And so I said, well, let's try this with you and let's see what happens. And so we would start measuring blood values and monitoring people's, biometrics and seeing how they're doing. The amazing thing that I started seeing is that when people actually lowered their carbs and many of which got into ketosis, within about 2 weeks, their blood pressure normalized. And I went, whoa. In fact, many of patients that were on, 2 or 3 blood pressure medicines all of a sudden called me up and said, hey, I'm dizzy, I'm lightheaded, what's going on? And so when we checked their blood pressure, these medicines were actually now too strong and we had to start backing them off. And that puzzled me initially because I thought, well, this is interesting. The literature says, well, if you lose weight, you're going to see a drop in blood pressure by 5 points. For every 5 pounds of weight, for every 10 pounds of weight you gain, your blood pressure will go up 5 points, and vice versa is kind of the standard you're taught in school. But I was seeing much more than that. I was seeing more dramatic drops in blood pressure. And so it didn't make sense. So as I started seeing this happen and we started looking into the research that's there, we realized that this high insulin load actually stimulates the body to retain salt, sodium and potassium, and even magnesium. And so your body will hang on to these salts, and water follows salt wherever it goes. Water's kind of the boyfriend for salt. If salt goes here, the water follows it. And so as the insulin is stimulating the kidney to retain sodium and these salts, potassium salts as well, the blood pressure stays higher. And it seemed like the more people followed a low fat diet, the higher their blood pressure crept. And when I switched it around and we put them on a ketogenic diet, their blood pressure would fall. Well, that correlated really well with the drop in their insulin loads and the drop in their overall inflammatory markers. And so we'd see this drop. Amazingly, I will see in the office is that when we put a person in the ketogenic state, before they've lost even 5 pounds, many times I'll see 10 points in blood pressure drop, which didn't correlate with what we were taught in school. So I thought, well, this has to be hormonal. And so as you start looking, and that's what we talk about in the book, is there's a number of physiologic functions that insulin stimulates. And when you have excess insulin present, you're going to see a dramatic rise in blood pressure. And when we return that insulin level back to its baseline normal level, all of a sudden blood pressure normalizes. And it does so quite rapidly. And so that was one of the first eye-opening processes that I saw that just surprised me and I was not expecting to see.
Yeah, because you go to the doctor, and when I first was kind of starting this journey, that's one of the things I did. I went to the doctor, and he's like, "You're pre-hypertensive," and I'm like, "Okay, what does that mean?" He's like, "You almost have high blood pressure. You're right on that line. So when you lose the weight, your blood pressure will go down." And that was just kind of the deal. Is it was caused by being overweight, But the ketosis is basically doing it faster, and I think that's a good thing to note. Is whenever you're going to change the way you eat, the way you move, the things you're doing, it's worth having a conversation with your doctor beforehand so they understand what you're about to do and at least can monitor your medications and things like that. So you're not doing something that can potentially wreck yourself. Even though you're doing the right thing, you have to be aware that, if you start feeling a certain way, you need to talk to your doctor because you're actually improving your health, but your medication doesn't know that's what your intention is. So it's going to do what it's supposed to do. And you want to make sure that you're working with your physician to do this.
Absolutely. I had a lady that called me up one day and just mad as a wet hen, and she was upset that her husband got hospitalized because of the diet. And I said, "Well, who's your husband?" She goes, "Well, he's not your patient." I said, "Well, did I put him on the diet?" She goes, "No, I did. But he's on 4 blood pressure medicines and he almost passed out." And so she was really upset that her husband, had to go to the hospital because he was so lightheaded and he had this near syncopal or almost passing out episode. And the doctor said, "Oh, that diet's terrible." Yeah. Well, what happened was suddenly his blood pressure dropped and he's over medicated. So we'll talk with your doc.
Talk to your doctor, please. Okay. And they may not understand the ketogenic diet. They may not even agree with the ketogenic diet, but just kind of understanding that what you're getting from this book is real advice from a doctor that's saying, okay, look, this is what could potentially happen. Have the conversation with your doctor. This is why it's a good thing. You can share that information with your doctor and make good health decisions because the doctor is there to help you. They shouldn't be the decision maker. You should be the decision maker. And the doctor's there to facilitate you getting healthy. But if you have something you really believe is going to work, have that conversation. Be armed. This book is a great way to arm yourself with that because you can just basically say, look, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm thinking. I want to give this a try. Work with me and make this happen. And most doctors, once you kind of put it out there that way, they're like, okay, fine. If you have some problems with your blood pressure, you start feeling dizzy, give me a call and we'll talk. Give the office a call and we'll talk about lowering your medication or whatever we might have to do. Don't put yourself in a hospital just trying something, work with your doc. Now, one that was very interesting, and I knew there was a kind of a link, and it's a kind of almost a three-way link. The way I look at it is when you look at insulin, you look at cortisol and you look at testosterone, there's kind of this internal battle happening in your body that if any one of those things gets out of sync, they kind of mess with the other ones. And I always kind of knew that existed from the things that I had read, but you put it out there really, really clearly that working on your insulin levels and taking care of yourself using the ketogenic diet, you can actually improve your testosterone levels. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. This is one of those other shockers that you're going along practicing and you're applying these principles, and all of a sudden people start getting better, and you went, wait a minute, I didn't do anything to fix that, nor did the patient didn't change anything. What happened? And testosterone is a real complex hormone, and the way it's produced, the way it responds. What we find is that because of a number of influences, this high insulin load begins to affect the way the fat cells produce hormones. And our fat cells produce a plethora of hormones, at least 8 of them specifically influencing the way blood sugar is handled, the way insulin responds, and the way the brain handles testosterone. And so as you see this rise in insulin, what ends up occurring is you see changes in the way leptin and some other connective hormones like kisspeptin and how those affect the pituitary gland, and then again go on to affect the testicular production of testosterone. And it's a very nuanced, it's very sensitive system because very simple things can influence it. But there's this dramatic effect on the way we see, and about a third of the men that come into my practice who are insulin resistant will start to see their testosterone drop. And so they come in going, "Doc, okay, I'm gaining weight. I have no energy. My libido's gone, and I just don't feel like I used to feel." And they'll start to see breast size enlargement. You'll get this male pattern or this breast enhancement or breast enlargement that occurs.
We call those moobs.
Yeah, boobs or the man boobs. Yeah, and they come and go, and the wife is coming and going, "Doc, I got to buy him a bra," and so it gets to be a challenge. And for many men, it's very embarrassing and they don't want to talk about it. But it happens to about a third of the guys that I see with insulin resistance and also diabetes. And so the big challenge is that there's not a lot of great treatment for this other than giving testosterone. Well, giving testosterone has some significant side effects we have to watch very closely for, and not always does just giving the testosterone itself fix the problem. So as we started applying ketogenic lifestyles, and we started naturally lowering the insulin, this big insulin response by just removing the starches and the sugars out of the diet and giving people back fat. What that does is it allows, number one, the insulin level to drop, but number two, when you're giving people back real fat, that now the body can create testosterone from the fat. Testosterone is a derivative of cholesterol, which is a form of the fat. And as your body now has the adequate fat present to make adequate testosterone, we see this improvement in the overall function. So I'd see guys' testosterone jump 150 points back up to normal just by making a dietary change within a couple months. And it was dramatic. And I was like, wow, we're getting better response with just this dietary change than I was with giving them topical testosterone creams and things of that nature. So very effective in a very brief way. The book actually goes into a lot more of the detail of how that works from a physiological level. But it was another one of those shockers for me to keep seeing this repetitively over and over again. Guys' testosterones are getting better.
Yeah, I had interviewed a vegetarian on the vegan actually on the episode, on one of my episodes when I first started. I'm like, okay, well, let me some science is there. You read through it and it says, okay, this works and people are healthy. And I'm like, I don't know that I could go completely vegan, but I'm going to go pescatarian, for a lack of a better word. I'm going to eat fish because I live on the Gulf Coast, so it's really hard to avoid fish as a staple. And so I was like, I'll try pescatarian, and I went ahead. I got a blood test, and everything was what it was. My lipids always run really high, which I'm not totally concerned with, because my HDL relative to my triglycerides are awesome. In fact, sometimes my HDL is higher than my triglycerides by a good bit. And so I was in that kind of mode. I'm like, okay, I'll try this pescatarian. And my LDL did drop a little. It didn't drop what I would call like significantly. My HDL plummeted. My testosterone plummeted. And, I basically gained weight on the pescatarian diet. And I was like, this is unbelievable. I'm eating the way skinny people eat. And I'm getting fat, and I'm like, it just made no sense to me whatsoever, except for the fact that I couldn't get satiated because I wasn't eating enough fat, and so here I am eating some nuts, but a lot of fruit and vegetables and fish. And it's a very even though it's fish, it's still generally a lean fish. They're not serving the skin and the whole fish, so the way they would in a lot of other countries. It's here's the fillet, and so I actually gained weight being a pescatarian. It's not what my body needed. So I eat a ketogenic diet, but I eat it kind of on a seasonal basis, and I think that makes it a little bit more sustainable for me because, well, my brother is a brewmaster, and I love beer. And I occasionally enjoy a couple glasses of wine and things like that, and those will sometimes bring me out of ketosis. So I'm like, okay, look, I enjoy tailgating. I'm in the Southeast. I love football. Are you a State or Arkansas? I mean, Arizona or Arizona State fan? Before I go too far.
I'm gonna offend somebody if I tell you that. Okay. I actually, my father-in-law went to ASU, and I've got another brother-in-law that went to U of A. So I kind of have to play the fence.
Okay, you have to play the fence.
I didn't go to either. I actually went to Grand Canyon University. So
okay.
I'm I'm a Lope actually from that perspective there. But it depends on which family member I'm with as to which team I'm rooting for at the time. So yeah.
And when they're playing each other, you just disappear.
When I'm playing each other, I watch from home.
Yeah, exactly. But I say that because football down here is kind of a cool deal. We love our sports, our college sports particularly, and so during that season, I just want to be able to go and kind of enjoy myself. And I realize I'm not going to feel my best. I'm not going to operate and maintain my best. But I'm basically going to take that time to enjoy my life. And then when it's over and I'm, seasonally, I'm get through what I would call my spring and summer when, food's abundant, then I'm going to kind of go into my winter where now I've got to go and get back into ketosis the way, my ancestors very likely spent a large portion of their life being from Northern Europe. And so, when I kind of look at all this, I'm like, okay, getting into the ketogenic lifestyle is not hard if you have that determination to get there in the first place. But I see so many people wanting to kind of hold on to some semblance of the way they used to eat. And they typically do this through artificial and some natural sweeteners. So they're like, well, can't I use the no calorie sweeteners or, those types of things? And if I were going to use one, which one would be the best one for me to consider using? And, for me, I'm not a scientist. I don't know all the science around all of it. I know that there's a lot of ill effects for quite a few of them. And there's new ones popping up every day. And it's just too much to keep. To me, it's like, just eat whole food. And at some point, you're going to find that, a carrot is actually probably too sweet for you when you actually try to just eat a carrot because your body's telling you there's a lot of sugar in this. A strawberry tastes delicious. We used to put sugar on blackberries, and I have no idea why I used to do that because now I eat one. It's like, oh my God, I can't have more than 3 or 4 of these because they're just so sweet. So you do change your palate. But that said, there just are some people who they need that bridge drug or something, that sweetener thing, and to get them to the next level. Can you talk a little bit about some of the artificial and the natural sweeteners, and what is the right way for us to consider, and which one, if we were going to do one, which one would you consider the best of the breed, so to speak?
Okay. Yeah. No, there's a couple questions there, but let me, it's interesting. I practice from a perspective of people have to live their life still. You still have life. You're still going to show up at Aunt Matilda's house and she's going to want you to eat a cookie. And if you don't eat that cookie, she's going to be really upset. And, you may offend Aunt Matilda for the rest of your life. And so people have to make
and then she writes you out of the will. So yeah, I get it.
Exactly. Yeah. Or she dies the next day and you just feel horrible that, you never ate her cookie and she just is going to hate you for eternity. We have to understand that people have to live their lives. And I totally get that. In my household, growing up, love meant sitting down in front of the TV watching Buck Rogers eating a large bowl of popcorn and a large Pepsi. And to this day, when the TV turns on, I still crave the large bowl of popcorn and Pepsi. We create these traditions and habits around activities and around life, and we have traditions that we participate with our family and friends, and those are actually important. Those play a big role in part of living, and they actually play a role in our overall well-being and happiness and joy that we experience. And so, what I tell people is, we want to use the diet and the lifestyle, and I call it more of a lifestyle because we want it to become a part of who you are, but we don't want it to control you. A lot of people don't realize how controlled they are by food, and most people who are complaining, "Hey, I just have to have this. I want to eat the same way I was eating before," don't realize how controlled they are by what they eat. We find that. What I find is that there's this bridging series where you travel from the standard American diet to a ketogenic lifestyle, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes years for people to move through that process, and it's okay. In the process, I tell people, well, you're going to want to use sweeteners because you're going to want to move from one process to the other. What I found is that it took me a couple years before I realized I was eating for fuel, not eating for happiness or joy or stress or anxiety. We still eat for those reasons, and most of the time, when I'm craving sweets, it's either because I'm anxious or I'm stressed or I haven't had enough sleep or, I'm moody or whatever it may be. And so those are usually the times when people are craving those types of things. You find that when you're truly in a ketogenic state, that food just becomes a fuel, and you're not eating it because of the joy that comes. You're eating it because you're hungry. And that it's a different concept that a lot of people have never experienced before. To go back to the sweetener part of it, in that process of learning to eat in a new lifestyle, you're going to want to have cheesecake. And my wife is, she used to, when we first got married, one of the ways she showed love to me was she would make food. She would make homemade bread, and she'd make these wonderful pies and cakes. And I loved them. They were really good, but they went right to my middle. And that became a challenge. And then all of a sudden, when I shifted my eating style, she could no longer make these foods. And so she felt like she couldn't express love. And that became a challenge for her. And that may be a challenge for some of your listeners. So we found ways to kind of do that. So we use sweeteners in some of the foods we make, in fat bombs and cheesecake and things of that nature that are out there. And Maria Emmerich and some of these authors that have done some just phenomenal jobs in helping us learn how to use these different foods to cook this way have given us great help. To answer the question about sweeteners, most sweeteners, we use them for really one to three reasons. Number one, we use it for taste to give us a sweet flavor. Number two, we use them to create a crystalline or crunchy flavor in the food. That's what sugar did really well to bake with. It created a subsistency that made desserts have a certain appearance and a certain texture to our palate. And then lastly, we use them sometimes for fuel. In the case of a ketogenic lifestyle, we're not wanting to use it for fuel, nor are we wanting to use it for energy, but we often want that texture and we want that taste because we miss it, or it relates to something that we associate with that in regards to family or cultural aspects of life. The challenge is finding one that replaces that, and that's sometimes can be a struggle. There are sugar alcohols, there's non-caloric sweeteners, there's long chain fibers that have sweetness to them, and we talk about that in the book. There are tons of them. All of them don't raise blood sugar. That's the nice thing about all of them, is they don't raise the blood sugar. But that's not where the problem lies. The problem lies in that they actually stimulate an insulin response. And so most of the sweeteners that we talk about in the book, and we went through as many of them as we possibly could, don't raise the blood sugar, but they spike the insulin. And that's where the culprit is we don't want more of an insulin spike. There's only a few that don't, and that's going to be one of the sugar alcohols called erythritol. There's a liquid stevia, doesn't spike insulin, and chicory root, which is a long chain oligosaccharide. It's a long chain fiber. It doesn't break down, doesn't spike the insulin, but it has a sweet taste to the tongue. And I'm probably forgetting one more right off the top of my head. And then there's combinations of those three, like Swerve and various types of brands that you may find that combine them together. The big challenge is that does the sweetener do what you need it to do when you cook or bake with it? And then does it give you a texture that you're looking for and a little bit of sweetness? What you find as you've been in the lifestyle for a while, as you very well mentioned, is that your palate changes to where I now will do some heavy cream and a couple of blueberries, and that tastes like ice cream to me. So it becomes very, very sweet to you when you pull those away, or when you remove the sugar and the amount of sugar that we used to eat.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. I mean, when you talked about Maria's recipes, it's amazing how, she's doing the experiments and she's figuring out how to kind of get the textures, get the tastes, and really put that all together. It's a learning thing. It's a finding what your palate is. Your palate will change over time. And as you get into the lifestyle, basically over time, you're going to find kind of the balance that works for you. And there isn't like a one way fits all thing. It's really about just kind of finding your own way through there. And that's one of the really cool things about your book is your book is really about healing. It's about, you have some issues. Ketosis is a way to help with a lot of these lifestyle or civilization based issues that we have in our lives. And then, having Maria in here to provide some great recipes, particularly recipes that you'll recognize. These are not foods that are unique to keto. These are recipes that you would see in a Southern cooking book, or you would see in just any other cooking book. But she's adapted them to the keto lifestyle and included some of those things, like you said, the fat bombs and things that you're gonna want as you kind of go through here to kind of get that satiation to get to that point you want to be. And then Jimmy put some great kind of anecdotes and some things about his struggles and life as he's gone through this. And so again, a great book. Adam, I really, really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you about the book, because this is something, like you said, your bookshelf is full of keto books. My bookshelf is full of keto books, but I learn something every time I read one, and I learned a ton from your book. So if someone wanted to learn more about you or to get the book, where would you like for me to send them?
Oh, have them go to docmuscles.com, docmuscles.com. That's my website. That's my online presence there. That'll get them linked up to the main website, to the blog. They can actually purchase a copy of the signed book there if they want to, but that'll get them started, and that's kind of the springboard point that I send everyone to get started.
Yeah, and I can tell you his Facebook lives are just they're off the hook. They're wonderful. Every time I see one pop up, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to lose 45 minutes of my life, but I'm going to invest 45 minutes of my life into this conversation, because I'm going to learn something in the next 45 minutes. And there's not a lot of that pops up on Facebook that you can say that's true. So thank you so much for doing the Facebook lives and all that you do. And thank you for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
Oh, look, pleasure to be here. Thank you, Alan.
All right. Before I signed off, I did want to thank you again for being a part of this podcast and helping me make it better. Go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/survey. If you want that free coaching call, you can ask for it. And even if you don't want a free coaching call, I really would appreciate it if you take just a few minutes to go out and complete the survey so I can make this podcast as good as I possibly can. Go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/survey. And if you have time, if you catching this on the day it releases, April 30th, and you want to be a part of the Burpee Challenge, hurry on out to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/burpee and sign up so we can make May an awesome burpee month. So Our guest next time is Carolyn Ketchum, and her book is Easy Keto Dinners. All I can really say about this is cheesy biscuits. Amazing. I have made those cheesy biscuits probably about a half a dozen times since I got her book. They are really, really good, worth the purchase of the book. But Carolyn and I talk about a lot of things about cooking keto, shopping keto, and how to have a keto kitchen. But we also get into some of the recipes. So it's a really good episode. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.